Today is May 15th, 2023. My name is Laura Stoner, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Lund. And we're here to talk about your Vietnam oral history experience. We're going to start with a very simple question of when were you born?
May 16th, 1945,
Okay. And where were you born?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
And what were your parents' names?
Lewis and Marion Lund.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father was working for the Navy at a base there. I'm not sure exactly what he did, whether he was teaching. He had been in graduate school in physics at the University of Missouri before the war. And my mother was staying home with two babies.
So you had one sibling?
That's correct.
What was their name?
That's Carl. He's
Uh-huh.
1 year older than I am.
And is he still living, or?
He is.
Uh-huh.
He's the physicist in the family and worked at Los Alamos and other government labs before retiring from Los Alamos, and then in Albuquerque is where he is now.
So what branch of service did you
I was
serve?
Army,
You were Army. And then, okay, where did you go to high school?
Rolla High School in Rolla, Missouri.
That is Rolla.
That's correct.
And then where did you go to college?
Went to Washington University in St. Louis, and then on to graduate school at Emory University in Atlanta.
And what were you studying?
English.
English. And how did the family of physicists feel about a person studying English?
They were actually very supportive. What both my parents wanted is for my brother and me to find what we enjoyed and to do it well. I had been a good student in high school in science and math, but my father did think it'd be better if I had more choices. Where he taught was an engineering school, pretty much science, engineering, math. It's fine for my brother, but so I found that I liked history and literature more, and so gravitated that way.
Okay, so then you were drafted.
I was drafted at the end of my first year of graduate school. They eliminated the college deferment that year, Congress did. If you had 2 years of graduate study, you could continue, and you had another deferment. That's the situation my brother was in. If you had 1 year, you were subject to draft, and I remember these details. There were 9 men who finished the first year in the graduate program, in the PhD program at Emory, and 4 of us were drafted. And all 4 went to Vietnam. All 4 came back. I mean, that's good.
Yeah. So what were the total dates of your service during the Vietnam War?
Well, you've got the specific dates in there.
Is it 16?
On the DD-214, it's something like June 70 to March 71.
Okay. I think it says you were drafted May of 69 on the form. Does that?
That's when I went into the military. Right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. But then you were
I spent a
training
year at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I did basic training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then because of my experience in journalism and the fact that I had a degree in English, they just sent me to the information office at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So I spent, less than a year, 9 or 10 months there.
Do you have any particular memories of basic training that you want to relate?
It's pretty much what most would tell you. I didn't feel isolated or identified in any particular way. When you shave everybody's head, they all look pretty young, and I tried to act young, although more of the basic trainees were 18 or 19 right out of high school. I did find other college graduates in exactly my same situation. So there were people to talk to and exchange views. We tried to stay out of the limelight.
Did were you married by the time
I
you were
was married.
drafted?
My wife, who's the best person on the planet, as you can guess, she was studying biology at Emory. And we had come from different places. I was from Missouri, she was from Virginia, and we met at the end of that first year. And she watched me get the draft notice, and I said I didn't want to go on without her, and so she married me. I mean, I think it's absolutely foolish. These were young kids, because who knew what would happen. She left her graduate program when I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to go with me. She ended up teaching 7th grade math and science. She became a college professor. She could teach anything, but she had to give up a National Science Foundation fellowship to go with me. When she came back, she couldn't have that, because if you've ever turned one down, I had a fellowship through Emory that was funded by the Danforth Foundation. They just held it for me till I came back. So I had my full 4 years paid for, and had 2 years, but then they loved her and found money for her, so she worked as a lab assistant. So we, I like to say, finished graduate school with a daughter, a washer dryer, and a car, and no debt. It's rare now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We did well in that way.
Um, so
Everything you touch.
so you go to the information office after you finish your basic training. What are you doing at the information office?
It's fairly routine. That is, you do stories for the local paper. You do what they call hometown news releases. That is, if a private gets promoted to private first class, you do this little story. At that time, all those stories were formatted in a particular way, and they went to Kansas City to a central office where they had the contacts of radio stations and newspapers in all towns in the United States. So it was a real industry. And then my policy was to do everything I could to sort of be seen as valuable. And a major, there was, I think a lieutenant colonel was in charge of the information office, but the major wanted to have a daily radio show in the Hopkinsville and Clarksville area, which he wanted to call the Fort Campbell Report. And we had a person who was actually finishing his time in the service after being in Vietnam, who knew the technology of how to do the broadcast, but he didn't want to do the writing and the announcing. So I said, well, I can do that, because I wanted to be. And so that turned out to be a key thing. I ended up being assigned as an audio journalist or audio correspondent in Vietnam. And I can show you this later. One has the sense, if you're outside the military, that you just go where they send you, and you don't have any ability to affect it or change it. But I have a letter from the colonel saying, I want to introduce you, it was going to the Army in Vietnam, to Specialist 4, whatever it was, Michael Lund, who's done all these things. Well, I ended up at Army headquarters, which means they saw my credentials and my experience as valuable, and they wanted me to be doing important things. So initiative, application, skill, actually, in many cases are rewarded. Now, that's not true in all. And when they made me a correspondent right out of basic, I often say I was the only one who got the MOS, your military occupation specialty, for what I could do. You know, they needed in a battalion of 1,000, they needed 999 infantry, but they might have 10 slots. So they looked down there, well, here's this guy with this degree, and here's this need in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So there's a lot of luck to begin with, but within that, you can be rewarded.
So how long did you spend at Fort Campbell before they sent you to Vietnam?
I'd have to look for the dates there, but basically it's about 9 months. We got there in August, and my wife taught for a year. By the end of the year, I had the orders to go overseas, and we moved. She decided to spend a year back in Virginia. She was teaching at a school, again, seventh grade math, science, for the year I was gone. So 2 months basic training. I think I had a few weeks leave, and then about 9 months there. I had maybe 3 or 4 weeks before I had to get on a plane and head to Vietnam.
What did you think of Fort Campbell, Kentucky?
I had not had anything to do with a military base, not from a military family. It was a good place to be. I was able to live off base. My wife and I had an apartment, and she would drop me off on the way to work. We had one car, and pick me up at the end of the day. And I was a reporter. Now, again, it's better than a lot of jobs, frankly. And you wanted to do interesting things. So when they started the radio show, I also started looking for people I could interview. And I have a great interview somewhere of no, that's those are my audio, some of the audio I did in Vietnam, on a man who had been a country and western singer before. It's a lot of fun recording and putting together that story. So it was a good assignment. I would have done it another year if they'd let me. But again, the training prepared me for a good assignment in Vietnam, and I luckily got that assignment.
So, well, how were you as a enlisted military person feeling about being sent to Vietnam at the time you're being sent?
Well, this is later. There'd been a lot of changed opinion about the war. There had been protests at Washington University when I was there. I never thought I would be in the military. I didn't foresee the changes. At Emory, there was a little bit of protest, but not protest, demonstrations, I guess, about the war. So I read enough to feel we had probably taken on a very difficult, if not impossible, task. I mean, the French found that. We underestimated nationalism, that this was not a struggle between the communist bloc and the free world. It was an internal struggle for independence and cultural preservation. So, but somebody was going to have to go, and I couldn't justify my enjoying the benefits of this country and not doing what I was asked to do. It was not extraordinary. Again, I was very, very lucky. So I just went and tried to do what I was supposed to do over there.
Did you have any sense of danger or personal safety being compromised?
I traveled a lot with the job to get stories. So anytime you're riding in a helicopter over a country that's not really yours and has enemy forces, you're in some danger. I would hitchhike on jeeps and trucks and any way I could get to wherever I was going to go. But as far as I know, no one ever shot at me. I could see sort of general um, warfare going on. There was always artillery firing into the hills. I was required to carry a firearm, a 45, when I traveled, and I certainly stood guard duty at Long Bend when I was back at the base. But I was very fortunate.
So did you go immediately to the U.S. Army Vietnam headquarters when you were deployed?
I went to Cam Ranh Bay, which is one of the main places where troops came in, and you always wait a while before you find out where you're going, and you have to go to Benoit first, I think it was, and then, or it may be, yeah, and then on to Long Bend. But all sorts of people are going places. I got to stop that. And the Army's very good about getting them where they have to be. So, say 40 miscellaneous people, they're going to get on some sort of transport and go to Benoit and then on to Long Bend or out to other bases from there. So I just sort of, again, went with what was going on. Didn't want to get too much attention.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go on this bus, I'm on that bus.
So you're there and you're a war correspondent
That's right.
for the Army. And how is that job different from your Fort Campbell assignment?
Well,
other than being in helicopters over
yeah.
a war zone?
What the information office wanted at that time in Vietnam was stories that showed two main goals happening. The Vietnamese taking over the roles that Americans had done in protecting the country and developing, and then the idea of winning the hearts and minds, or pacification. The rebellious forces, the Viet Cong, and their support, the North Vietnamese, were losing, and we were able to develop programs and facilities for the South that would support a more modern, democratic society, moving towards some kinds of industrialism. I have examples.
Okay, tell us about them.
Well, I went out to Tay Ninh one time, which is on the western edge, close to Cambodia. It's a place where there's a lot of infiltration of North Vietnamese troops down at the bottom of the bottom of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And what we were doing there were two things. It was USAID, United States Agency for International Development, plus military. They were building a tuberculosis hospital. Tuberculosis wasn't really treated well there. So I went out and I talked to people from USAID. I talked to engineers. I would talk to anyone who spoke enough English to talk about what they were doing. And I put together this audio presentation about how this was going to make a tremendous difference to help people. Now, I often found out there were complications. The project was running behind time. Getting labor to do it, because of course some people didn't want the Vietnamese cooperating with the Americans. Supplies could go missing at every point of the delivery train. So I just talked about how we were doing this. It was also, they were building a technical high school there. And again, this was going to give local people a chance for another way of life and profession and benefits of machinery and the ability to build things. They couldn't seem to get electricity there. So there's this building. So, I focused on what my job was, to show that we were doing all we could. And a civilian journalist would have focused on the flaws and the failures, especially at that time. I'll give you my most dramatic example. at Long Bend in the Army headquarters, uh, there's a bunch of generals, and they're all getting together, and they would have a daily review of the civilian news from the United States, from television. They had a studio about as big as this, but with tiered seats, and put this up, NBC News last night, and CBS. And it was just one disaster after the other that they're putting up there, and the generals are moaning. How can we change the focus? How can we show that we're making progress? Uh, Now, I was just a fly on the wall there, but I could see uh, public opinion had just gone against this war. So we could all do what we could do, but it was either going to be a long, long war or a disaster. And it turned out to be a disaster.
So how did you feel about having to just portray the progress rather than saying, the journalistic kind of critical eye? How did that make you feel as a person who, did scholarly research and things of that matter, where you're kind of trained to be critical? How did that make you feel about your job?
But you see the bigger picture. There are people who are doing that job and doing it very well, and there are people who are trying to do a different job, and I work for them. And if every Army journalist feels he or she has the authority to shape the story, you have problems. So I could probably say that I was a sort of distinctive journalist. That is, I was really a scholar who'd had journalistic experience. Most of the people I worked with were trained journalists, and they did fret and fuss about, and a lot of them were taking notes about what they do when they got home, taking pictures that they would try to get out of the gun. You can't just send pictures back. And I like to say I was the only one in that information office that said he was not going to come out and write about the war. Turns out I was wrong. It just took me 30 years before I could start doing it. But I did have a little bit more objective distance view of things. And so putting aside my civilian journalistic identity to become basically a public relations wasn't as hard for me as it was for others. And I mean, I remember we escorted civilian journalists, Orly Safer was right there, and so I knew he was doing that job very well. I had to do my job.
How did you record all of these stories? Were you a one-man recording studio, or did
We had a studio, production studio, but yeah, I carried a cassette tape recorder and a microphone. And sometimes I was traveling with a photographer, sometimes I was traveling with a print journalist, although I could do the print myself. But yeah, so I'd record everything I could on a cassette recorder about like that. And then I'd come back to the studio and transfer it to reel, and then start to edit it. And editing then means you actually, you have your tape, you cut out, and you splice with Scotch tape, the tape together. Whereas now, of course, you have your wave.
digital?
Yeah, digital. And it's easier. Cut out the wrong piece of tape, you're in trouble.
But then you had to have batteries and cassette tapes with you, and
Yes, yes.
logistically feels, like you could be getting good stuff and then you run out of battery, and that would be so crushing.
I don't recall ever being in that situation, whether I was just planning ahead or whether I had a gazillion batteries. I don't remember. It was not the technical problems that would prevent me from doing something. It was other things. And again, it was much more fun to be out interviewing someone about a tech high school than trying to keep people from coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So I didn't complain about that or the technical features. And that's, this was an interlude, I thought, in my life. Student, graduate student, professor. And it took me a long time to figure out that's actually not the case.
So what do you think was the biggest thing you learned from that job?
Well, that's pretty tough. I've told you about my best friend in my unit, Stephen Warner, who was a star student at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, who went on to Yale Law School 1 year there before he was drafted. I'd actually known him at Fort Campbell. We ended up together, and he was doing what I was doing until a certain point when he got to know a particular infantry platoon, got to talking to the guys, and he started going with them into the field, taking pictures and interviewing, and again, saying he was going to write the story of what the infantry experienced. And he took one mission too many, and he was killed. I didn't have a strong enough desire to do that, and in some ways, that's a flaw. I wanted to go back and be a graduate student. Law school and how the law works identifies injustice in that case, and so he pursued it as sort of part of his professional role. My professional role might have been, well, to see how all this fit in history, ancient Vietnamese history in terms of China and Korea, and so that's the path I took.
Did you ever get to see any of his notes, that what he thought he was
Yes.
documenting?
Now, all that material went back to Gettysburg College, and so there are photographs. There's a special exhibit there. But he also kept a letter that he was writing to his parents if something happened. So he'd go back, and he'd come back from one of his assignments, and he would write more in it. And he gave the letter to me, and he says, if anything happens, you take this to my parents. So I did. As you know, I was what they call a body escort. When he was killed, I was sent to accompany him back to Princeton, New Jersey, to the family. And I have a feeling I was supposed to give that letter to whoever I was reporting to, the commanding officer of that detail, but I didn't. I saved it and gave it to his father. And of course, I had looked at it, but I didn't read, and he said things like, I feel like I'm doing the most important thing in life I could right now. And if something happens to me, it's worth it. He's telling his parents. He had one sister. So it's about as honest a document as you can get.
But what was he looking for when he was going to with that unit?
Again, I think he and I could identify ourselves as privileged. We're both good students. We grew up in stable communities with stable families. Our career was just,
Taking a break.
Yeah. Whereas a lot of the infantry, high school kids, and who had no idea why they were there, and their goal was to survive. And of course, if there was an enemy shooting at you, you wanted to shoot at them. How did they process all of that? That's what I think Steve was interested in. What kind of courage that's sort of outside of the privileged life we had lived did that call on? And when I started Home and Abroad, the writing program, in 2015 in rural Virginia, working with a lot of poorly educated He's got a problem. People, I decided it was time for me to use my skills as a historian and teacher of composition to get their stories out and try to understand them at the same time. I talked to one man in Crewe, Virginia, tiny little former railroad town, I guess. I met him at the Hardys. He was about my age, I guess. He was black. He retired, sort of. And he said he wanted, he'd write this story. I said, it's really good. And he told me about how he was given the choice. He'd gotten into some trouble in high school, go in the military, or probably end up in prison. So he went in the military and he did what he had to do in the States. And all of a sudden they sent him to Vietnam. He got orders. He didn't know where the heck Vietnam was and what he would face there. And so he saw a man he knew coming back from Vietnam. He stopped and he says, "What's it like over there, man? Tell me." And the guy said, "Go see." And I told this man who was telling me this story, says, "There's the title for your book, Go See." You could take him there. And then he told me, about how someone didn't learn about booby traps until it was too late. You can show all that, but writing was intimidating. I can't quite hide that I'm a college professor, so talking to me sometimes is a little complicated. I don't want to write the stories myself because I know the writing is important to them, and I want it to be their book. So that was one of my failed efforts in Home and Abroad, but it shows me what Steve was able to do over there, and others too. It's not that he's the only one.
But that maybe your project is kind of a continuation of what your
I
friend.
like to think that, yeah. Is guilt a factor in that? Probably so. Is it survivor's guilt? Well, probably so. Is it, maybe I should have done this then? Maybe. I can't see myself doing things differently than I did, given my level of maturity and everything else. But I can do it now. I have skills. I have the frame of reference. So it gives me a sense of satisfaction to be using my talents in this way now.
You've worked with veterans from different types of conflicts.
That's right.
The Vietnam War, obviously, but also you did do some World War II, or did you?
No, people were in Korea. That's in
Afghanistan and Iraq.
I've had trouble getting that younger generation of veterans. It's less eager to talk to my generation. I mean, there was that split between Vietnam and World War II. I've talked to some and had them write some, but I've really been trying to work on that. How can I get the next generation? And trying to get exposure and connections to other organizations that might help me do that. Because I think that's important for many reasons. Now, whenever we can sort of get with the next generation, after a little bit of it works. One of my good friends, whose son joined the National Guard, ended up going to Iraq and lost his leg. Now he's fine now, but his mother went to help him recuperate at Walter Reed for 6 months. She stayed up there. And she says she can't tell you how many parents and soldiers said the best people helping us are the Vietnam veterans. So if we get there, we can show we understand, but it's hard to do sometimes.
Well, between the Korean veterans and the Vietnam War veterans, what would you say is the difference in how they're processing the conflicts that they were involved in?
From what I've talked to, Korean War veterans felt there was a mission, and that Eisenhower finish the mission in a sense by stopping the conflict and drawing the line and communism north and democracy south. So, and they didn't face the public reaction that Vietnam veterans did, which is not just that we were involved in a bad war, but we were bad people because we did it. And so that, and the Korean Wars, it depends on the individual, so, but I think they felt they were more connected to the World War II than to Vietnam.
Okay. So there were, you didn't really, did you, you saw artillery and things, but did you ever get engaged with the enemy?
No.
Did you, had you traveled before you, outside of the United States, before you went to Vietnam?
Canada, just an over the border thing. And traveled a fair amount in the United States, but no.
So how was that experiencing a different culture, a different language, different
Well,
food?
You know, I was in an American structure. You know, we had the PX, we had restaurants, we had bowling alleys, especially in the big bases. And it was hard to interact with the local people. They worked for us mostly. I mean, they came and got your laundry and washed your clothes for you, which you didn't want to do yourself, and the Army didn't do it. Now I did go. One of the possibilities I had when I was in basic training was to become a Vietnamese language translator. 9 months out at California, which is a very nice place, Fort Ord. But I knew where I'd go after that. But I knew several. One of my fellow graduate students at Emory had took that route, and there was another one. I connected him down at Nha Trang, which is on the coast of Vietnam, and it was a sort of French resort. There was an English language school there, and so I went down to do a story on the school and talked to him, and he would talk to locals, and because he had the language, but he said it was still really hard. The structure of our position in the country is just so problematic.
People didn't feel like they could speak freely to you?
At least I was not in a position, there's nothing to tell me. I was not supposed to do stories about American successes, you know, and American individuals. It would have been interesting to say, okay, Lund, you go over there and take a translator with you and see what the people really think. It'd be tough,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
How did your family feel and your wife feel while you were deployed? Did she struggle at all without you there, or?
Yeah, we should really ask her, but we can say this, that she had 4 uncles who served in World War II. One was in Europe for 3 or 4 years, not coming up. One was in the Pacific, island hopping with the Marines. One was in the Pacific in a clerical role. And so her family tradition is, you know, these are good things to do. She had her own career, which was deflected. Oh, I say she's just a natural teacher. She can teach anything and anyone. So that was a fulfilling thing. And she just didn't take up the political issue of the wars being just or not just. My mother, I believe, supported the war early till it turned out I was going to be drafted, and she thought it was a terrible thing. And of course, she was Republican, so Nixon was okay. Johnson, a disaster. My dad really didn't like to talk about any of these things, so I don't know how he felt. Uh, I think, you know, you make the assumption you'll come back. They make the assumption you'll come back. You cannot anticipate down the road what you're going to be like, nor can your family. And you know, people my age come back to it with a whole different perspective. I mean, I don't believe, I mean, they go to the VA, they ask you all the time, are you depressed? Do you have something? And I don't believe I do. I think I've been so blessed to have this academic career, a wonderful family, a wife who supported me through all that. I do occasionally wake up and say, what can I possibly do to make it up to Ann? You know, that she went with me to Fort Campbell and then, you know, lost her fellowship. You know,
And yeah, but it seems like it still worked out for her.
it did. That's for her, you know, credit. I mean,
And the female, the expectations of women marrying at that time, you know,
yes,
you were,
very
you,
much in transition,
yeah.
exactly. And so, I mean, I was uh, I was pleased to be, you know, the husband of or the spouse of a woman who's getting a PhD in biology and teaching biology, and you know, I mean, she knows stuff. It's just amazing. And so I always say, you know, I did type her dissertation. I was a better typist, and it's so much Latin, you know, because it's plants. You know. So, yeah, I think I support her in her career. It can't be equal, but we are happy with each other after 55 years. So.
Well, you talked about your own survivor's guilt. Did your brother have any feelings because he was 1 year out and was able to avoid, not avoid service, but wasn't required to serve?
You know, that really is for him to say. He did go to work for the national defense industry as a physicist, and so he can't tell me what he did, except they had a lot of computer programming in it. Uh, he would not tell me, and he probably would not tell you.
Yeah, it's fair.
Yeah, we're Midwesterners, we're Scandinavian descent. Man, we bottle everything up.
Push it down.
Yeah, push it down. Repression is the good thing.
Um, well, I mean, what can you tell us anything about camp? You know, you're on base, what life was like in terms of like holidays or recreation? How did you pass your free time?
Well, at Fort Campbell, since I was living off base, that was easy. Now, sometimes I had to go in for formation or something like that. We were on duty 7 days a week in Vietnam. So we could, because we were reporters, we had a press card, we could go into Saigon if we wanted to and, you know, eat at a restaurant, go down Tudo Street and buy things. I had another very good friend who is at 2 Field Force, which is not that far away. We could get together one place or the other and just catch up on everything that was going on. There were E4 and E5 clubs where they had bands and plenty of beer, and so evenings were easy to deal with. I read a lot of books. I was an English teacher.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so uh, you know, off time was not a problem.
Did you spend, like, do you remember any holidays that you were in Vietnam and what you did?
I don't remember them as holidays. I remember that on the 4th of July, there was a lot of firing of weapons, you know, sort of fireworks, but kind of crazy. I mean, everybody was firing a weapon and just firing them into the air. Ugh. I don't like fireworks as sort of a part of the reaction to this. I did R&R over Christmas in Hawaii with my wife, so that was odd Christmas, but it was a Christmas and it was a holiday. Um, But I remember a single other, was it Thanksgiving? I don't know.
Do you remember any like USO events that you could have attended?
Um, Bob Hope came and we sort of traded off so everybody could to go see from the information office was there in Longden. Lola Falana was there, and it was exactly what you would see on television, and guys screaming and taking off their shirts, and Bob Hope, very funny, knew this audience. Uh, so there were those things. Let's see, there were, I guess USO had places where you could get coffee and donuts, and there's probably a pool table or and or just read books, just get away. Yeah, I remember being there and doing that, but
Hmm.
it's,
Do you remember how you kept in touch with your family members and your wife?
I did write letters. I also, because I was in an audio studio, I could record a tape and I could send it to my wife, and then she could record one and send it back. That was kind of nice.
How long did it take to get one? Like what was it like 2 weeks or a month
I
or?
would say more like 10 days. It wasn't that bad. And as I also had typewriters, so I typed letters and she would type letters. We had one phone call. The way deals work, we had Polaroid film. There was people who had connection to the Mars system, military. It was radio. You would be on a phone, and the radio signal would go to the States, and then it would go to another radio, so you could talk to. It was the delay and everything. So I used midnight requisitions to get some Polaroid film, and I got a call, and we found we didn't know what to say. I said, "You okay? I'm okay. You got money? I got money." In 10 minutes.
There's so much to say yet
Yeah,
not enough. You can't go through. You have to go through the niceties of.
yeah, and it just it was more disappointing than, and it obviously took a long time once I was back to uh, reestablish living together. And I mean, it's a pretty common story. She'd been running the whole show. And I thought I had some say in things, but I had a new position. I was extraordinarily grateful to all the things she was doing. And then I said, wait a minute, she's also going to graduate school because we went back together. So
It was
it
an
was a good
adjustment.
thing in terms of the marriage.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How did you, with your pay in the military, did you opt to save it all, or did you just send it all to your wife, or?
I think you had to send a certain amount to your wife if you were enlisted. And so that was automatic. Uh, I didn't have much use for money, really. So I think I bought a camera, I bought a watch or something at the PX. But we had bought a new car in leaving Tennessee or Kentucky and coming to Virginia. The allowance she got paid the car, so that was really nice. We had a new car at the end of this. Um, you know, we had enough money, and we were frugal. We were educated.
It does seem like the auto industry really benefited from the Vietnam War. It seems like a lot of Vietnam veterans used their hazard pay, or, the pay,
Oh, darn.
to buy cars.
Yeah.
And someone was telling me that they had some sort of muscle car thing or a payment plan or something
Oh,
at the
yeah.
PX. Um,
Could well be. We bought it before we left, and I said, well, we'll just take care of that. And we our daughter was born when we came back in '72, and uh, we her insurance from teaching in Virginia helped, but there were still things to pay. We had something like $17 left in cash, but we,
Paid.
yeah, it was paid, yeah. I mean, she had to have a cesarean, which hadn't been planned, so that was extra cost. And they kept women in the hospital a long time with that. But, I said, man, I got $17 and a daughter and a wife, and I'm walking around, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Um, so let's see, I'm going through the questions to see did you perceive any strengths or weaknesses in the enemy forces that you observed? Like, did you ascertain anything about them?
I, all I can tell you is we had enormous firepower, which I could see. Uh, we had, of course, artillery all the time. We had on the uh, on the Cobra gunships, the helicopters, rockets. They also had miniguns, which fired, I can't remember how many rounds per second. If you saw them, every 10th round is a tracer, it looks like a red light going down. You see them out there, it's just chewing up the land. Uh, what have they got? AK-47s and grenades? I guess some rockets. Yeah, and of course they had to haul all that stuff down the Ho Chi Minh Trail on their backs. We had, go to Da Nang, you go to and see the big ships coming in with every weapon you can possibly imagine, crates and crates of beer. We had everything we needed.
Okay, so while you were in Vietnam, it seems like Nixon starts drawing down the troops.
Yes.
So do you have any did you get any sense of a feeling of how the troop morale was about, them reducing the amount of troops in Vietnam at that
Everything I
time?
saw said cynicism had slipped in pretty well. We had the Paris peace talks going forever. And I think often declare peace and go home, which is really what Kissinger did, declare victory and go home. Now, I didn't know many career military who were thinking this is what would make their career, and they wanted the war to go on so they could be heroes and so forth. I'm sure there were some, but among the drafted, no, let's get out of here. And yeah, cynicism.
Did you technically get out earlier
Yes.
because of your being a student?
Yes, well, I was debating, you could get out if you had a semester starting up. So I can't remember how many days it was, but a good number of days. If you wrote your university and they wrote back, but also I was watching people in my unit get drops so that Nixon could meet his deadlines. I might have gone home even earlier if I hadn't done the drop to go back to school. But we thought, Ann and I, that would be a good thing to do because she would finish, I was coming back in March, she would finish teaching that year. I would commute down to Emory to sort of get back into the graduate school mode. Then we'd move down together. So it gave me time to settle myself and allowed her to stay in the role she had created while I was gone. So I think that turned out to be a good idea.
Do you mean when you say you commuted to Atlanta from
Farm.
Farm?
Yeah, that 10 hours.
So would you go on?
I went down on a Tuesday morning, had a seminar Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, came back Friday. So I had good long weekends. And people say, how can you do that? I said, well, it's a lot better drive than the ones I've been on.
Yeah.
So, that was a no-brainer.
Did you the the South Vietnamese armies, were you involved with any of are they the people that helped you do your reporting, or?
Not really. It was the American military that would get me from one place to the other and tell me about possible stories and so forth.
Okay.
That was the network.
Um, hmm. So did you do anything physical to entertain yourself, like tennis, or one person told us they chased snakes?
Oh, there were volleyball courts in the barracks. There were basketball. Uh, so yeah, I play any sport.
Did you, but your base never was under fire or,
Well, there would be rockets, and no time when I was there was there any sort of significant attack that I knew of. Things had settled down in that area. Now, went out to fire bases. I went to out to Tainted and other places where it was less, but I was lucky. And wasn't just lucky. The real soldiers were protecting me. That's what they do, and I didn't fully understand it until much later. That's why I could get my correspondence badge, hop on a plane. People take care of you.
mm-hmm.
You ride on one of those. He said, "There's a gunner right there. He's scanning everything down there."
Under a constant state of
Yeah,
higher perception?
yeah. We occupied the country. Is what we were doing. We were an occupying army, and I was part of that.
Going back to school after you got out of the military, did you sense anything about, I mean, the war was wrapping up, but
Mhm.
did the anti-war movement, did that anything at Emory?
I don't think there was anything at Emory. I do know that Washington University, they burned the ROTC building while I was gone. I know that at one point when I was at Fort Campbell, there was talk we might have to go into Vanderbilt, and provide security. Uh, but Emory in the South was more conservative and not concerned with these things. So, and frankly, I was out. You know, I'm a graduate school student. I'm studying Victorian literature, so
You were putting it behind you.
I was, so I thought I was.
And the other graduate students that also got enlisted, did you think they all kind of did the same thing, or?
I think they all tried. I think there are factors. One didn't finish his dissertation, and whether that's related to sort of his experience with it, it's hard to say. One finished his dissertation, went to work for the Veterans Affairs Office in Washington, but had personal issues. He was gay. He didn't accept it. He had married. He had a child, and he began to drink, and he finally committed suicide. One other that I know particularly well is maybe the smartest of all these people. Took a job that didn't involve a lot of research opportunities. I think it's just a job to pay the bills. So, yeah, everybody was marked,
Mm-hmm.
and the person that I ended up sort of being he and his wife, who were expecting about when we were expecting, he had been drafted out of college, Presbyterian College in South Carolina, North Carolina, I'm not sure. And he was in the infantry. He was in a armored mobile unit, but he had a long, tough year. So he went in while I was going, but we were in sync when we got done. And he and I, we wanted to be scholars. He was a Shakespearean, is a Shakespearean, really nice guy. And I remember at Emory, they thought we were all going to be at Tier 1 university research centers. And the industry changed in that There'd been so much expansion, they were cutting back, so there weren't that many jobs. He got a job at Troy State University at Fort Rucker in Alabama. Troy State's not the premier institution. Fort Rucker is. He loved it, you know. He was teaching, and he eventually moved on to University of Alabama, Huntsville, became department chair, did lots of really great things. I was at an all-women's teachers college when I first went there. This is not the premier institution, but I was happy to be there, and I give myself credit. I adjusted, and I says, I can do good here. You know, I can prepare future teachers, and so whether that's how our experience helped us do those things, I don't know. I think others' experiences had much more negative effects. Can't say why.
So did your wife also teach at Longwood?
Did what?
Did your wife also teach at Longwood?
She taught at Hampton, Sydney.
Oh, at Hampton, Sydney.
For 34 years, yeah.
And she was taught biology?
Yeah.
And what's your wife's full name?
Anne, with an E, Castine, Lund. She offered to come today.
Oh, you didn't tell me.
Well, she didn't do it till this morning, but we'll come back if you want to talk to her. She's worth talking to.
We'll have to talk about that, yes. Did you, like Ho Chi Minh died while you were in country. Did you have any experiences with?
Again, we were pretty cynical. You know, we didn't think anything was going to change. Again, somebody just had to declare the war over, and we'd come home. And we joked at Army headquarters in Long Bend. There's a sort of a statue on a pedestal out front, a general or something. Well, that's where Ho Chi Minh's statue will be. Well, that's not a joke. I mean, it took the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what about, and then Kent State happened while you were in.
Yeah, or what was I, Fort Campbell? I can't remember the exact date. Yeah, I certainly had, mixed feelings about college students, college campuses, with the war going on. And in many of those cases, there were people telling students how to get out of the draft, having seminars basically, and ways to go to Canada, do all these things. Open debate is good. How you can survive as a country if you can't find a common purposes, and even if that was a flawed one, so many wars are flawed anyway. What are you going to do? I mean, that's what I told you about the end. I am connecting national service to community service, young or old, and a lot of veterans very much involved in community service. And we think that, second service. And I come from a family that didn't do that. I mean, we were, my dad was a theoretical physicist. He lived in his head, and we weren't involved in the community in any particular way. I like being involved in the community. I like feeling the things that can be done, and that I'm part of that. I mean, after all, Prince Edward County, famous for closing its schools, we're part of helping to deal with that and creating a much better environment. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess there would be something if you almost went somewhere where you could have given your life for
Mm-hmm.
your country, that you would want to continue to serve the community.
Yeah.
Because you gave so much, for that.
Yeah.
You don't want to see it go down the toilet.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of idealism, and you have to have a certain amount of faith in human nature and the people you live with. You're often disappointed in many ways, but that's sort of the easy path to say, well, everybody's crooked, everything is busted, so I'm just not going to do anything. You can say anything, but here's a little thing right here you might fix. Yeah, that's what that's what I try to do in a number of things, but particularly with the writing program. Here's a guy who could tell this story, and it'd be good for him to tell the story, or her, and then others to read it. So let's do that much.
Well, how did you feel when Saigon fell in 1975 and you were home and
Yeah. Well, probably trying to finish my dissertation, find a job, and I'd seen the direction of history, I think, so it was not a surprise. The terrible thing to me now is we didn't learn much, did we? We go right back to other countries and tell them what they should do, and cost them, cost us. So now, exactly what we should do, that's another thing. But I like things like the Peace Corps, I think.
Mm-hmm. Um, is there something that no one has ever asked you about your service in Vietnam that you wish they would?
That's the one I answered.
Oh, yeah, you did.
Yeah. And I think that's it. What are you going to be 50 years later? And is it connected? I was going along a path that was not connected at all. Scholar, and I was a successful scholar, and I can talk about that too, but things kind of came out, and it sort of started. I taught, Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried is one of the major books about Vietnam, and there's a story in that called How to Tell a True War Story. Basically, he says you can't, no way to, but I asked myself, do I have any kind of war story? Because I sort of thought I hadn't. And so that led to the first story, How to Not Tell a War Story, which is about my generation's ability not to tell a story. So when I came back and really fell in love with the Victorian novel, the Victorian novel was long, 800 pages, David Copperfield. I thought it was just because I liked those things. I do like those things. But it's probably not been, it's been 8 or 9 years ago that I finally realized there's something else here. War says life is short, and it doesn't mean anything. It ends with the next bullet or whatever. On Victorian novels, modernism, which is the period after the Victorian period, it's small books, short poems, a lot of them that go nowhere. I was studying that to resist this, and I didn't understand it for the longest time. And I gave my students the framework of long stories so that they would think about where they might be, and whereas a lot of contemporary teaching of literature is, you live this moment and it's over. It's not connected to the next moment. I don't like that. How can we have a museum if we don't think things of the past inform the present and the future? So in some ways, it was therapy for me to read and write about the long Victorian novel. I mean, I thought it was just this academic interest, but it's a lot more than that. And so now I'm telling other long stories, and stories. This fictional village I'm working on, where there are veterans who carry their stories and their sense of service, or World War II veterans and Korean veterans, and I'd like it to be a model that helps redefine what a veteran is, And, uh, you know, whether I'll be successful or not, we're gonna find out.
Well, can you tell us one of the, well, we can either talk about the things that are right here in front of you, or we
Yeah.
can talk about one of the stories that you've published from one of the veterans through your
Yeah.
program, if you would like.
Okay, well, I do want you to have this. That's the audio, digital audio. uh, And I,
Do you want this, do you want us to download it and give you the USB back, or?
you can have it on that digital. And, if you want sort of documents, and when I came home
Yeah.
with Steve Warner, I have this. I don't, I don't need it. What they told us about separation back then, there was no, as far as I know, training about how to deal with your family when you got back. You're just out. Okay. Let's see. This is, I don't know, I just got it somewhere, so it's an old official document. If it is of any interest, keep it. If not,
No, I think this stuff is like really good to kind of illustrate
yeah.
what information you were getting.
Yeah. Now, I would have been full of myself and my intelligence and my education to probably ignore a lot of stuff, but I don't think we were adequately prepared to deal with the reality that we got back. So, give me that stack of books. So some of these are what you might call standard war stories. This man who's actually living in Iowa, had a moment where he was literally confronted with the enemy, dead reckoning. And he struggled with it for years and years, and I just helped him write it. Others are, she went to Vietnam as a nurse and was actually the first woman, I think, married in Vietnam. So
So she was married to another service member while she was there?
yes, well, I think it's another nurse. A few years back, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you look at that if you want. This is another war story, crazy in Rocket City, just a man who spent a year under that. And that's the same thing. This is interesting in that this man had always wanted to be an artist, but his dad said, "Oh, you can't make a living doing art. You have to be a carpenter." Well, it's a good living, and he did that. But then he got drafted, and the Navy, and I think he enlisted in the Navy, they made him a machinist or a boiler tender operator or something. But, he persevered with the idea. He came back, he worked as a carpenter. Then he had a terrible accident, and they said he wasn't going to be able to work as a carpenter, but they would help him get credentials for something else. So he went to school as an artist and distinguished himself and had a career as an artist. I really like that in the sense that you can have your dream and you can pursue it. Now, let's see. Maybe you better give me another hint toward what you.
Well, can you tell us about the photographs that you brought?
Yeah, I just pulled the stack. And I don't know if any of them is particularly interesting. This is another reporter who went with me up to the North Coast, where there was a man out on an island who watched all the boat traffic. And he sort of like the last lighthouse keeper. And So there we are at the Trang Press Corps. We did drink beer. I think this is the language school in Nha Trang. This is the technical school in Tay Ninh. This is me at the microphone. This is Bernie Edelman, the man who did Dear America, Letters from Vietnam. He used to nap in our sound studio, you know, because it was enclosed and
Soundproof.
officer would come knock on the door, he'd be asleep back there, no one would know. Oh, and that's the place where Ho Chi Minh's statue would go, we said. Here's beer coming in, and most of these, again, are just sort of, you know, snapshots of Vietnam that don't mean much. And again, you can copy any of these that you want. There's volleyball.
Oh.
You sort of take pictures. There's Saigon. I'm not a photographer, so you take some. You can make a sack. I'll come back and get everything you don't want, but you can make copies of anything you want.
Yeah, we can scan them and. Well, that's great. Do you have anything else you want to share with us, or?
Oh.
Do you, so you have your program.
Yes.
How do you find new participants for home and abroad?
Word of mouth mostly. You know, I started with the VFW in Farmville, and I had sort of a practice workshop with them, but that led to, and I got in touch with this organization down in South Carolina called Mill Speak. They were doing seminars, and they authorized me to do one. And then I got to know a person who told the American Legion, and so and there's a organization called Piedmont Area Veterans Council in Farmville, and I did a seminar through them. And that, you know, I follow it wherever it goes. But that was what expanding the audience for Veterans Voices was hoping to do. Find other participants. I'd like to get another group, because groups really work better. You get them together, they talk, they loosen up with each other. And I sort of talking to the VA to say, could I be of help there? But I have a feeling they have their own structure, and it's different, you know, it's therapy. And I think of it slightly different ways.
I didn't ask you about your what medals you got during your service, and
Yeah.
I see that you got a good conduct medal on your record that you gave me,
Yeah.
and a National Defense Service Medal, a Vietnam Service Medal, and a Vietnam Campaign Medal.
Those are all sort of the standard things. If you win, there should be a page 2.
And then you got
Bronze Star.
the Bronze Star Medal.
Yeah. I mean, I have it. I had it when I came home, and I have the certificate, but it didn't show up. In St. Louis, in the VA files, there was a fire and a lot of stuff was lost. So I did write, and eventually they confirmed that I had the Bronze Star, so they sent that emendation.
And it says you're a marksman M16. What does that? Does that mean you're really good
Just
shooting?
qualified at that level with the rifle at basic training. Yeah, it's not. I think it's not expert. I don't know what top is. You know, I was okay. Let's say that.
That's
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you all have any questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Lund?
Covered it.
Well,
We can always ask again.
I'm happy to have done Emily, and I'm gonna meet Emily Raymond at the Fine Arts Museum for
Okay.
lunch, so
Okay, good.
touching all the bases that I possibly can. I think,
You had a daughter. Did you have any more children after?
I have a son,
Uh-huh.
who's an international teacher. He's in Brussels. He and his wife, they teach in American schools, international schools. And we have the one grandson who's 5.5. And so we've managed to get ourselves over there for Christmas, and we're looking to go back. But it's harder to travel when you're, well, tomorrow's 78.
Happy early birthday.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I was leaving those.
Okay. Well, then, we're going to thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and contributing to this project, and we really appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate the chance. And if I can do anything more, let me.
Thank you. Okay, addendum to the interview. Did you perceive any racial tensions within the military ranks?
Well, I knew there were racial divisions in the office at Army headquarters. There was one black man, but 30 white. That's not an accident. You know, it's, again, how things are filtered and structured. You come in with a certain amount of credentials, degree in English, and you're from this university. Well, okay, you can probably do that. And this is I wouldn't have written journalist as my top, right? But everyone who goes into basic gets, as a matter of right, an interview with a personnel specialist. So I went in with this guy, and it turns out he had been in graduate school at Temple, I think in political science or something. So he was interviewing me, and he said, well, let's look and see what we can identify in your record that will help you get a good job. Because I've been drafted, so, you know, there are these channels that help you, and you still have to work. You end up at Army headquarters. But, and, you know.
So you're saying that black people didn't have as many avenues to the
Absolutely
more secure jobs, so they ended up in combat more often than.
Absolutely. And that means more casualties. And I think there's also economic factors that encourage some people to enlist. It's like in that, the book about the Dillwyn Baptist Church of Dillwyn, you know, 3 young men enlisted to see the world, ended up in Korea, and 2 of them didn't come back. But there was nowhere to go in Buckingham County. So, whereas grow up in a college town, your dad's a college professor, you got options. But no, I was not, never surfaced anywhere where I was. It would be out in the field. I certainly don't recall any black officers, you know, in the information field. And of course, there were no women. There were some women with the civilian press corps. Can't remember what that was, but so the divisions were there, and I know that they flared up
Yeah. Thank you for giving us that memory.